Hello and welcome to the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. Joined today by Bob Ferrante and Jerry Cutts. My name is Pat Burnham, and I'm your host. We've got a ton of stuff to talk about today. We've got FSU spring practice, our spring scrimmage #1 under the books, and we're going to talk what they said, what we heard as FSU head coach Mike Norvell spoke with the media, as did offensive coordinator Gus Malzahn and defensive coordinator Tony White. We're also going to talk a little bit about the play of the secondary. Bob wrote a story on Jabril Rawls and Earl Little Jr. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about what we heard from various sources on the spring scrimmage #1. Get into a little bit of recruiting. Talk some FSU baseball, and also talk a little bit about Lonnie Alameda and possibly some basketball if we have time. But guys, how's everything going today? Bob, you're joining us remotely. Jerry's in the studio with me. Jerry looks like he is ready for a quiet evening on the porch with all the lighting behind him. So how's everybody doing?
I'm doing good, Pat. I got a well-lit background, don't I?
You do.
I think Jerry's in New Orleans, is he?
That's it. It seems like it.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, it's a busy weekend. We did not get a chance to see the football team scrimmage, but obviously we would not have. Sorry about that. We're working from a studio today, guys. This is a work in progress. We were trying to do something that we'll announce a little bit later down the road, but we're working for a studio today, and at least I am, and Jerry's here, and we're working our way through some bugs. So we're going to get into a lot of these stuff, but let's start with the spring scrimmage. We would not have gotten to see that even if media rules were the same as last year. So what we've always done post scrimmage, fall or spring, is kind of break down what the coaches said to us, said to the media, and we've now titled it "What They Said, What We Heard," guys. And we've got roughly about 45 minutes between the three coaches on Saturday afternoon after the scrimmage. And I guess what we'll do is we'll start with the head man, Mike Norvell. He said they got 110 play scrimmage in. He talked about some players specifically. But Bob, you were there for the press conference. A lot of times we read body language and tone of voice in these press conferences, and you were there in person while I was out talking to recruits on Saturday. What was your impressions of what Mike had to say?
Well, how about this for what Mike Norvell said? He said, lived in the middle of the field when there was a question about leadership that was posed to him. And I think that's an interesting dynamic for Mike Norvell. Is during a scrimmage, he's not calling the plays. He's not on the offensive sideline. He's not embedded with the defense on that sideline. He's taking a really broad view of what's going on with both of his coordinators. And this is a spring of change, guys, right? I mean, 30 plus new players between the transfers and the high school guys, 2 new coordinators, 6 new assistants. So I think it was really interesting for Mike Norvell to live in the middle of that field, just to get that whole viewpoint from a big picture of what it looked like. We'll go into what the assistant coaches say. I'm not saying it was smooth. I think Tony White went into detail about, not everything on the headset was great. Not everything from a substitution standpoint was great. But just that first kind of baby steps of a new coaching staff, putting it out there in the indoor facility, so everything's a little bit compact. But I think it was a good first experience for the coaches, just to get a glimpse of the players, but also how it all meshes together.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it on Friday, Bob, when you and I spoke, and Mike had actually probably addressed for the first time how that transition from play caller to just head coach has gone, and it seemed pretty smooth. And he did seem pretty at ease with how practice went. I mean, we heard a lot of the same things we always hear: explosive plays from both sides. So we know there was give and take, which is good. But yeah, Mike does seem like he's fairly comfortable with the organization of how the offensive play calling is gone. And Gus actually talked about that in his post. Somebody point blank asked him who called the plays in the scrimmage, and Gus said, "I called all of them." That's kind of what we expected. But Jerry, I want to get with you. What I know you had a chance to listen to what Mike had to say, and what were some of the things that stood out to you in his press conference? And he spoke for about 14 and a half minutes and addressed a number of issues, but what stood out to you?
Well, just there's a lot of coach speak that came across to me. A lot of coach speak, but I think I think we're in that same thing that we were in last year, where you don't know if it's the offense is doing good or the defense isn't. So, and he kind of made that clear. But he's very enthusiastic about the player attitude and typical Mike energy, enthusiasm, and I think that it's a good first scrimmage.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, I think they were looking at a lot of things, as Bob alluded to. You've got the communications piece for the new staff, headsets, corrections on the sidelines, all that stuff. Now, a couple of things that stood out to me about what Mike said. He mentioned Jalen Lucas having a big run. We've all wondered about how he would come back from his injury. Seems to be going really well. He mentioned good speed defensively and pursuit in particular, that he was more impressed with that. And Tony White even elaborated on it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And again, the game that keeps on popping up, and it's still early, Kevin Sperry. We heard Mike talk about Kevin Sperry for a while, pushes the ball downfield, came out and played like he was just playing football. Does not seem phased, so there were some freshman mistakes, but certainly now we've heard Kevin Sperry, our early enrollee quarterback. We've heard his name multiple times. Just played football, had 2 touchdown passes, one to Elijah Moore, one to Willie Suarez, and then of course he mentioned Deuce Robinson again, and that is a name guys that I heard after practice. What was relayed to me was that he is the real deal. He is going to be a football player for Florida State. And we've heard that before. We've seen the videos of him before, so we've had that validated by somebody that we would consider a very good source and someone that knows a lot about football. Then the other thing, he talked a little bit. He really bragged. He got asked a question about the defensive line, and he was talking about, I think the term was used was there been any surprises. I think the way Mike was answering the question was not surprised by, but who has impressed him. And he really mentioned Deontay McCray and Tay Diggs. And he mentioned Tay Diggs' background story, how he got here. And he was really impressed with those 2 guys out of the transfer defensive lineman. Then out of the freshmen, and I did not expect to hear this, but he has been really impressed with the Desir brothers, Daryl and Mandrell Desir, who are 2 early enrollees, true freshmen from Miami. So those are some of the things that stood out to me. Again, 110-play scrimmage. Gus had it at 100 plays. Mike had it 110. Either way, a good day of work. And, Mike seemed impressed. Any final thoughts on what Mike had to say, Jerry or Bob, before we go over to what Gus?
Yeah, I think Mike talked, we should probably note, a guy that's come up of a name is Sam Singleton. We've heard Sam Singleton a couple times, Roydell Williams a few times too. I know we'll talk about him later too. Deontay McCray. I think we've focused on James Williams having that 3-3-5 experience at Nebraska, but Deontay McCray comes in with the 3-3-5 experience at Western Kentucky. So we kind of expected him to be a guy who, again, whether you start or you're a backup, you're a rotational guy on the defensive line. Deontay McCray feels like a really good pickup. And Mike also mentioned KJ Sampson as a younger, relatively younger from a snap count type of Seminole coming back. So I think, Pat, like you guys have said, it's a zero-sum game. In the spring, you're going to see something good at the expense of something gone wrong on the other side. But it does sound like the competition, the desire to track down a ball carrier from the defensive standpoint is there. The back and forth of competition feels better. The energy feels better than what we've seen in past years, what we're kind of hearing from people who are describing these practices and now the scrimmage.
Yeah, it's I think everybody's kind of gotten used to the way Mike talks. We try to read into it, but I thought some of the things that he hit on were important. Especially the linebackers. We've heard again the linebackers making impact. That's the second padded practice in a row. We've heard about the linebackers having really good days. I heard some of the players talking as they were walking off the field about Omar Graham being the MVP of the scrimmage. I think they were being serious. They were giving him a hard time. There's no doubt about that. They were having fun with him. So I think this is really the first time we've gotten to listen to both Gus and Tony after what we consider probably the most important day of the spring thus far. Spring scrimmage, getting to see what you got. Jerry, I'll start with you. Gus said intentionally they were 60 run plays in the scrimmage, 40 pass plays. But what were your thoughts on what you heard from Gus, and what stood out to you the most on his talking points?
I think the most important thing that he talked about was that they're just installing the basics right now, that it was designed to be 60-40 run pass, and that he's not doing anything unusual with the offense right now, just the very basic plays.
Yeah, and the one thing I like about that slower to install than they normally are. First of all, it's getting really good at the base offense, right? Which the things that you're going to build your offense are on and around, and what you're going to go to when you really have to do it. The other thing that he kind of mentioned when he's talked about the slower to install than they would if they were in fall camp or this was year 2 and they were here, was he felt like this might help in the evaluation process. You're not worried about scheming against the defense right now. You're worried about building fundamentally solid football players, technically and positionally sound, know what they're supposed to do, know their technique, know their assignment. And so I thought that was an interesting comment. Slower to install than normal, get really good at the base offense. And my takeaway was you probably wouldn't hear this much from a coach, but you don't need to scheme against your own defense, maybe for the spring game or the last scrimmage when you're trying to catch them off guard. But yeah, you can save the scheming for your opponents and really get these guys good at the ABCs of and the fundamentals of football, and slowing the installation process has done that. And he said they'll get more into the schematics and setting certain things up as they get down the line. But Bob, what were some of the things that stood out to you about Gus?
I'll be curious. He said it was fast, but they want to be faster. I'll be curious, where are you, in subsequent scrimmages? There's going to be another one on Saturday, April 5th. There's going to be one, in each week down the road. April 19th being the last scrimmage before they kind of break for the spring. I'll be curious, April 19th, when we're talking to the coordinators, okay, can you rate the speed, the learning, and then how much could you push the tempo from scrimmage number 1 all the way to April 19? And the other big one I think is Gus kind of referenced either cross training or injuries without using the word injury on the offensive line, but did shout out Luke Pettibon as being a leader, as being a guy who was, making the calls and getting Florida State right up front. You like to hear that. I'm sure it's a good relationship that's being built between Luke and Tommy Castellanos. But again, without them mentioning specific guys who might just be out for a practice here and there, I will say Mike Norvell's done a really good job of saying when somebody's out for the entire spring. But it almost sounded like a reference of, hey, the offensive line is mixing and matching or down a guy here or there. So that's going to create some issues up front in a scrimmage situation.
Yeah, and the thing I liked about what he said about that, Bob, was he said we need to find continuity in the offensive line, and we can't do that right now because we're moving pieces around. And it sounds like to me there might be a little bit of, and I understand that you may have to have a guy move positions during the course of the season if you only got 8 starting caliber offensive linemen on your roster. I get all that. But I do think that Gus wants to try to get these guys set and comfortable at one particular position and then move them as needed. That was kind of my reading of what he said there is, hey, we're moving some people around, but at some point we're going to have to find out who fits where. And we do know there are a number of injuries. We already knew about golly, I feel Jacob Rizzi. So we already knew there was an injury there. He said a couple other things. Again, he was complimentary of Kevin Sperry, said football is very important to him, but he said the same thing for all three, that they all three are Tommy Castellanos, Brock Glenn, and Kevin Sperry are all fanatical about getting better at football. I think that might be as honest a thing as we've heard about the quarterback position since they've been here. I mean, obviously, we raved about, Mike raved about Jordan and those kind of things, but we got a nice little breakdown there of what he thought about all three quarterbacks. So I thought that was good. Other thing that he said, we're getting there from a physicality and toughness standpoint. And coming off last season, I think I'm glad he's talking about it, but I'm also glad that we are hearing that, hey, we're not there. We're not where we need to be yet. I'm not sure. That's one of the things I liked about the coordinators talking is we got a little bit more of an opinionated take on what they saw. But Jerry, I'll go to you. What did you hear from Gus that really stood out to you?
Well, I don't think you're going to get there in physicality after 6 practices, but the fact we're moving in that direction is a good thing. My understanding from my sources that saw the practice was that they were physical and that they did tackle to the ground in this scrimmage. So, that's what you just have to do if you're going to get physical. And I know that's important to Gus.
Yeah, and listen, he said they need to play faster. He mentioned that a couple of times. I've got that marked down a couple of times in my notes as I listen. So they're still not where he wants to be with either a speed or physicality. But listen, that's hard. Tempo offenses that you got to get in shape. You got to be ready for that. So I think there's going to be a bit of a learning curve or physicality curve there. But he said he did like the attitude of all the players. They want to be coached. So he was very happy with that aspect of the scrimmage. They want to be coached. So I mentioned Squirrel, what a dynamic athlete. He didn't really talk a bunch about individual players in his press conference, but he did, who we had not heard much about from Squirrel, other than this is the only time I know that he's been referenced post-practice. But he talked about what a dynamic guy he was, so that was good to hear because obviously with the nickname, we're all hoping for a big season and talk about the FSU offense going nuts in 2025 with Squirrel catching a lot of passes. I'm gonna get that dad joke down pretty good. Again, he did talk about that he called all the plays, and so that's all what we thought. But now it's been asked. We know what that's going to be. What's going to happen? But he did say, hey, offense is 11-man operation. You got to have all 11 men. He goes, too many times you only had 8, 9, and 10 guys doing their job. Got to get more consistent with everyone carrying out what they're supposed to be doing, either from a technique standpoint or from an assignment standpoint. But any other thoughts on Gus?
Pat, that's where I think I'm not concerned about it not hitting tempo yet because you got to get the 8 and 9 guys doing the right things. And so I'd rather be slow in the beginning and get the communication between a play, correct each other, go on to the next play. Plus they had ACC officials working the game, and that's going to slow your tempo down as well. So, which Malzahn mentioned. So I think that they're where they need to be at this point. I mean, first scrimmage, it's probably about where you'd hope it would be.
Yeah, we heard both Gus and Tony talk about how important they felt it was for the coaches to be off the field, right? It gave them time to figure out how they work together on the sideline. Tony mentioned that specifically, but Gus did mention the officials, and they both kind of mentioned with being a new staff that there needed to be some things that are done operationally. Now it seemed to be more of an issue on the defensive side of the ball based on the fact that Tony addressed it more. But listen, I think Tony spoke for 17 minutes. I think Tony's one of those guys that's going to he'll talk to you as long as you're going to ask a question type of thing, which I appreciate. But Bob, I'll throw it back to you to start on Tony. He did speak for 17 minutes. What are some of the things that stood out to you about what he had to say?
It's obvious who's been a head coach at 2 stops because Gus's answers are a little bit more clipped, a little bit more in that 20-second soundbite, variety, whereas Tony will expound in really great detail. Not that Gus didn't have detail, honestly, but I think a lot of questions about the scheme and what are the first steps in the scheme. I think honestly, Tony seemed really, really happy with how they're learning, with the process of going to the classroom, with spending the extra time there. It's going beyond 20 hours. I think we know the college football calendar goes far beyond the 20 hours. And, he seems very happy with the amount of effort that the players have put in across the few months leading up to spring practice. I think that's a real positive. Talking about that kind of creating that turnover. I believe it was the Elijah Herring chasing down the ball carrier on that long play. And then the next play, it's Earl Little Jr. with the interception and the pick six the other way. I think that was Tony White talking about a red zone situation where Florida State hadn't been very good in the red zone on the Thursday practice. But then the response is, okay, on Friday, go over it. What went wrong? Let's learn from it. When we go back out on the field on Saturday, okay, how do we attack it differently so that we see different results? And I think to see the Elijah Herring chase down, the ball carrier, and then B, you come up with the red zone takeaway. I think those are kind of moments that you can build on. You hope that it's infectious and contagious among the players, as far as those kind of plays can say, oh, I can make that kind of play too. I can be in that position. I think that's what coaches are going to like to see.
Yeah, the thing I liked about that particular comment about Herring, the first thing I thought of when he said that was, all right, we've got a guy, and he talked about it, the fact that he's not a vocal guy, that when his personality comes out is when he gets out on that practice field or that game field. And you know what it kind of reminded me of? I was like, there's a Braden Fisk type of leader, an effort guy that's one of the best players on your team and is hustling, throughout practice. That's something that kind of, we didn't see that kind of intensity from any players on defense last year during practice, the same that we had seen from Jared Verse and Braden Fisk the year before that. So that's one of the things. Now, again, like I'll just kind of echo what you said, the players using their own time to watch film above and beyond the 20-hour rule is something that I kind of harped in on. They should be putting all the effort they can into 20 hours they're required to. I mean, it's a job, but the fact that, what he's saying and what I think there's something to this. There's a buy-in to what they're doing on defense if they're getting these kids in there when they don't have to be. I think when you're doing that truly shows that they are fired up about either how they're being taught or what they're doing defensively. So I thought that was one of the things that stood out to me. And he talked about let's build that mentality no matter what has just happened to play before. And you'll talk a little bit with Jabril Riles when we talk about your article, but forget about it, good, bad, or indifferent. Get up and play the next play. Don't worry about what just happened because you got something else to focus on. Jerry, what were some of the things that stuck out to you about Tony White's conversation?
Well, they seem very excited about the defensive secondary, and of course, Bob's going to talk about that in a minute. But they talked about their length, their physicality, the way they play the game, and I think that's organic. I think Tony White's got a group there that maybe he didn't have that much talent at Nebraska, but there are some players, young players in the secondary, I think are pretty special, and we've heard him referenced that several times. And this is without three safeties are out of practice right now. So and that was encouraging to me, what he had to say about the secondary.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that stood out to me in talking about the same thing, he started talking about the secondary. He also started talking about the defensive line, and he really thinks that they have a good amount of talent both in the secondary. Now, he was not asked specifically about the linebackers, and but he did talk about the fact that we're long enough, we're big enough, we're strong enough, we're twitchy enough on the defensive backfield. And the last several years we get somewhere in preseason camp, Mike talks about all the catapult numbers, right? And we were told coming into 2024 that this was going to be his fastest, strongest, most explosive football team. It didn't carry over at all, not through the first half of the first game. What I loved about what Tony White said, because he was talking, he probably has no idea that Mike talks about the catapult stuff, but what's it matter if you run a 4.4, but you're getting beat to the football by a slower guy? All this testing stuff is great. But if those test results, your physical skills and talents don't transfer over to the football field, it doesn't mean anything. And I think that was about as refreshing as anything that I've heard in a Florida State press conference in a couple of years, because we kept on hearing all last year about they're big, they're fast, they're explosive, and there was just no carryover. And listen, he goes, we have a bunch of guys on this defense that can play. So he clearly thinks after 6 days that there is some talent on the football team. He has doubled down on Darrell Jackson, could be the best defensive tackle in the country. So he's got a positive attitude, but he also talks about, hey, you got to flush the bad stuff and go to the next play. He's one of the only coaches I have heard say, you know what, the other team's got 85. I've told we have this conversation all the time. I can still remember an FSU DB getting beat for a slant in Louisville game 5 years ago, and I remember sitting next to whoever it was, and they said, I can't believe he got beat on that slant. And I was like, well, that guy's on scholarship too, and he got recruited. And so Tony's very cognizant of the fact that you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, you got to win more, but you got to keep on battling even when things go your way. So he truly feels, based on what he said, and we'll learn more about Tony as we go along, but he certainly said is impressed with what they have in the secondary and what they have up front. And some of that was echoed by Mike and what he said about some of the defensive linemen. Any other takeaways from the defensive side of the ball as far as what Tony said post?
Let me just say this, Pat, about what you just said is we'll get to know more about Tony as we go on. And I was thinking that as I listened to the interviews with all three coaches, we already know what Mike, what he says and what that means. But we don't know that about Malzahn or White yet. So this is a good data point. And as we move forward and this team starts to play games, we'll really begin to understand Tony White talk and Malzahn.
Yeah, and if you want to listen to what all the coaches had to say, please go to theosceola.com, and we've got all the video from practice. We got our post-practice rundown, what quote stories written. We got a story on Jabril Rawls and Earl Little Jr., who, Bob, you wrote it. You listened to what Tony White had to say about all three of those guys. What was your takeaway? Certainly, he feels like both. He gave the biggest in today's modern lexicon. He gave the best compliment you can give to a football player, talking about Earl Little Jr. But I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to hear him say it, but when he says he is him about Earl Little Jr., you're kind of okay. I mean that's a lot in late March when you're 5+ months away from a football game that really means something to hear that. But I think he probably saw enough of Earl Little in games last year as that kind of nickel corner and then safety, and then saw it through the workouts and these practices to know that that's a guy who's going to be settling in at Rover in a key position that they've got in that secondary. I think what I like about some of these discussions are, you might think of Jabril Rawls as a younger player. It's his third year. You might think of an Earl Little as a veteran, maybe, but it's also, I think, his third year of college ball or whatever after being at Alabama. So it doesn't matter how much experience you have. It just what's in your heart. What are you willing to work hard at? What's your mindset? What's your comfortability? Talking to Jabril Rawls, his comfortability is he's been at Florida State long enough. He's gone up against Hakeem Williams and now Deuce Robinson, and he feels good about his ability to attack the ball and get his hand on a ball, maybe create some pass breakups. We've talked a lot about takeaways, but pass breakups are really good too, because that's a negative for an offense. So it's neat to hear some different names, like we were talking about with no Shaheem Brown, no Conrad Hussey, no Edwin Joseph. Well, what names are we hearing a lot of? It's Earl Little, it's Jabril Rawls, Q. Everybody calls him Q. Quindarius Jones is a name that keeps popping up a lot. And it's not to say the other guys aren't playing well. It's just we're consistently hearing certain names out of that defensive backfield. And I think that's a really good thing when AZ Thomas isn't around anymore and Fentrell Cypress isn't around anymore, you're looking for what's that next group and who's kind of at the top of that next group.
Yep. I want to go back to one thing Tony White said before we finish, because it's really, and I don't know why I didn't circle it, but when we started talking about physicality, having that physical mentality that they want to see improve from last year's team, Tony gave Gus credit for it. It said it's the offensive mindset, being a physical, downhill, run the ball football team. And I thought that was interesting because, I could be wrong, but I can't imagine 30 years ago, Mickey Andrews walking in and giving Wayne McDuffie credit for the defense's physical mindset. I mean, because, I remember when Dad was coaching here, they'd get after each other on the practice field. The coaches would get into it as much as the players would. So that was interesting to me, and I thought it was kind of neat. And I don't know how many people, when they think tempo offense, also think physicality. But, I remember when my dad was coaching at Iowa State, and they were playing the Bryles teams that were tempo. And, Dad and Shane used to tell me all the time, the one misconception about his offense, just because you hear tempo, people think it's soft, think it's all X's and O's and scheming people because they run right over you. So anyway, that was interesting to hear. All right, so we're going to move on.
Pat, before you, let me
Go
jump
ahead.
on that. This was the first scrimmage. Let's see how they talk about each other after the third scrimmage.
Well, that could be true. They haven't known each other long enough to get after each other yet. That could be what it is. All right, so let's move to recruiting real quick. It was a very, relative to most weekends, it was a slow weekend from a perspective in recruiting. They only had probably had a dozen or so unofficial visitors, but it was not a lot of high priority guys like we saw for Legacy Weekend. Probably the two guys that stood out to me were Noah Lavallee, who is the brother of Caleb Lavallee, the linebacker that transferred from North Carolina. Listen, Noah is kind of taking his time, folks. I talked to him 4 weeks ago. He had told me who he was going to visit officially, which is Florida State, Ole Miss, and Kansas. He is still going to visit those three schools. And just like 4 weeks ago, has not set up an official visit date. But I think the Florida State will definitively get one with his brother here. And he was very impressed with John Papagis as the linebacker coach. That's different for Florida State fans to hear. Now, John has coached linebackers before at previous stops. And he talked a little bit about the style of play with the linebackers. And also talked about what his brother has told him. So we do have quotes from Noah. If you want to go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com, you can hear everything that Noah had to say about his visit. Probably the other guy that I think, two other guys that I'll mention, and you can go and read about the rest of the kids at theosceola.com, but Jamarian Gordon, the 4-star safety from Jackson, Alabama, which is also where the quarterback and Duckworth plays for. He was on campus for an unofficial visit. He was probably the highest priority recruit on campus. He was offered back in November after unofficial visit for the Charleston Southern game. He decommitted from UCF. He was committed to Gus Malzahn and decommitted the day that Gus resigned, which I believe was November the 30th. What a Florida State win would be to leverage that visit into an official visit. Right now, he's got official visits scheduled to Oklahoma State, North Carolina, Ole Miss, and Florida. And then another kid to keep an eye on who was on campus for the second time in 3 months was Antoine Sharp, the linebacker from Palm Beach Central High School in West Palm Beach. It'll be interesting to see. There's kind of a numbers game going on at linebacker from the high school recruit standpoint. We'll see how Antoine goes, but he was back on campus for the second time in 3 months. But you can get a complete list at theosceola.com on who was at practice on Saturday. And then on Wednesday, Nick Carlisle, who helps us with recruiting, put in a very busy weekend down in Miami at the Miami Rivals Elite Camp. You can actually go look at Nick's Nuggets at theosceola.com, but he will be visiting with us on Wednesday to talk a little bit about what he learned, what he saw at the Miami Rivals camp. So we'll have more on that on recruiting later in the week. Right now, what we're going to do is we're going to jump into about 1-minute commercial, and we'll be right back to talk a little FSU baseball, Doak renovations, and some other things. But please stay tuned and join us here in a minute. We'll be right back.
Hey Seminole fans, Alumni Hall is your ultimate FSU shopping experience and has moved to a new location off Timberlane Road in Tallahassee. Shop FSU gear from Nike, Champion, New Era, Yeti, and more. Alumni Hall has Seminole gear for the entire family, plus accessories and gifts. Spend $150 and you'll earn $10 off your next purchase with their Hall Pass rewards. Stop by their new location on Timberlane Road near REI or shop anytime online at alumnihall.com. Alumni Hall, where Seminole fans shop. Finding an experienced lawyer you can trust is crucial. With over 50 years of combined litigation experience, the attorneys at Mowry Law Firm are dedicated to providing our clients with exceptional legal services, focusing on car and trucking accidents, premises liability, and wrongful death. Call 904-824-7799, MowryLaw.com.
All right, welcome back to the Osceola Seminole Sidelines, a Monday edition. All right, guys, so we just got through talking a little bit of football before we roll into FSU baseball, which got off to a surprising start on Friday night, particularly after talking with Bob on Friday. I felt like it was going to be a sweep. It wasn't, but they did finish the season of the series off strong against Notre Dame. But I do want to talk. Both of you guys have been to Doak Campbell Stadium. Bob, you got a tour on Saturday along with a lot of the other beat writers. And Jerry, I think you've taken a tour too here lately. What do you guys want to share with Osceola readers and Osceola YouTube subscribers about what you saw on the tour, where the construction, where the renovation is at presently, and what you're expecting before the start of the season? Jerry, I'll start with you. Bob, you want to start?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, it was a fun day Saturday, honestly, because my memories early on are of the erector set at Doak Campbell Stadium. So kind of walking around it for the first times in the 90s, it was like, okay, this is great. But now you walk around the inside, you see wide concourses, you see what the future can look like as they've shaped out a lot of the various rooms for concessions and the concourses, and then these various suites. Getting to stand, I guess, about where the players would be, or behind where the players would be, in kind of some of these really nice field level areas. It's hard to believe that they're going to play football there in 5 months. I think that was the biggest kind of wow for me, is there's a lot of work that's been done. There's a lot of work that's still ahead, but the vantage points there, honestly, the photos and videos, I hope do it some justice. I hope convey to those of you out of Tallahassee what kind of work is being done with this project, but it's pretty incredible. It's going to look really, really special, I think, when it's all done, as far as just giving a really, really high level kind of fan experience, better concession experience, more bathrooms and such on the west side, especially too. But we got a good, I'd say 30, 45 minute walk through the stadium and have a nice kind of video of our tour. It was a really fun opportunity to see it in March. We'll be curious to maybe see it again in April, May, and June as this kind of project moves toward completion.
Yeah, let me add to that. First of all, the hardest part of any construction job is the first part of it. So in terms of them getting it done in the next 5 months, which it seems like it'd be very challenging, right? But all the infrastructure work is what takes the time. What they're doing now is the finish work, and they are working round the clock, 24/7. So they have the lights on at night so that the workers can be in there working. And when we did the last renovation in 2016, I had the Champions Club project, and it didn't look like we could possibly be done on time, and we were. It's just, like I said, the finished stuff happens a lot quicker than that infrastructure. The other thing I would add is when you walk that concourse, you get an idea that it is pretty wide, and it's better organized. There's fewer, the support beams in the old erector set, they were on 18-foot spans, In this project, I think they're on 30-foot spans, if I'm not mistaken. So there's fewer obstructions down there. It makes it feel more open. One of the things that I'm curious by is they have what they call grab and go stores, where you walk in it like a convenience store. You go get your own Coca-Cola out of a cooler, and then as you're walking out, they scan you and you pay. And that's, I don't think I've been in a stadium where I've actually done that before. I know the pro stadiums have it, but I'm not sure I've ever used it. So that'll be new to our fans, and that'll take some getting used to. And then the other thing, now they have, your traditional concession stands as well. The other things they've done is they've put in a very large bar on the southwest corner, which will serve beer, wine, and alcohol. So a fan can go down there and get themselves a drink. And they've got high top tables, with chairs. Well, maybe not chairs, but they have high top tables in that vicinity, so you can stand there and enjoy a meal or beverage. The thing I haven't seen yet, but I'm eager to see, if you remember the old West Side, the second level concourse that one up higher, row 40 to 60 or 80 would use, that was a tiny little concourse. And from what I've been told by Mark Hammer, that concourse is much, much better than what we had in the upper part of the stadium. So I'm looking forward to seeing that, because that would be a tremendous improvement if it's what Mark has described it to me to be. The other thing I'll add, Pat, before we go on, is on your tour, Bob, and on my tour, they didn't show us the Champions Club yet, but I took my own tour there for last week. and it'll surprise you. There's, we know about the big picture that they took out 13 rows in the upper portion and reduced it to 7 rows with standing tables and bar stools instead of club seats. And that's going to be real. I think people are really going to like that. I think that's a good enhancement. They also took the 4th floor and it's segregated now from the 6th floor. If I sit on the 6th floor, I won't be allowed to go down to the 4th floor during games and vice versa. And I think that's going to help the food service. I was really against that idea when I was involved in that project, but I think it'll give the food service on the 4th floor. They'll know exactly how many people they have to serve and how many people they need to serve them. In the past, depending on the weather, if it was cold, people from the 6th floor would come down to eat on the 4th floor, and they just got overrun. And so I think that's going to be another nice enhancement. So that, I think, is a full report on the stadium.
Did either one of you, did they take you to the suite area, I guess what I'm calling a suite area, behind the home bench where they've removed all those seats and they've got some seats up there towards the front, towards the wall? What were the sight lines like for people maybe that have not taken that tour? If you were going to, were you happy with your ability to see the field from that vantage point?
Let me say this, the patio that everybody, the party patio or whatever, that's right behind the team bench, that has the fans fired up. That you're not going to be able to see anything from there. In fact, it's almost a dugout. And so people won't sit there. They won't be there. They'll go to their seats to be able to watch the game, or they'll go into that bar and watch it on TV. But I'm still curious to see how that's going to function, that little patio back there. It's not near as big as I thought it would have been. And the whole club seat section in the renderings looks bigger than it looked to me in person. I mean, there's 2,400 seats. it's not a massive area in my estimation. But Pat, I think that it's, the other thing I would say is the club seats right now and the chairback seats, it's hard to get an idea what the sightline's going to be, Pat, because they haven't installed the chairs yet.
Okay.
And it looks to me, I'd be a little concerned that the club seat, the risers aren't high enough to where you'll see over the other person's head in front of you. But again, Mark Cameron told me that the person would have to be about 6'8" before it would, create, and you'd have to be about 5 foot tall before it would be an issue. So populists, they don't make mistakes like that. So I noticed on another site had a video, and they were concerned about whether the vomitories walls might block your view. But once you put in that mesh chairback seat, it's a lot higher than what a bench would be. It's a fair. Populous has done their calculations; they'll be all right.
Hey, Bob, I have a selfish question. What are the chances they put windows in the press box you can open so when we get fogged out and can't see anything, we can see? Did they do that at all? Is there any change? I know they were doing some work on the press box during the middle of last season. I don't know what it was. I know that we could only get 2 passes per game because of the construction. So no windows. But what construction was going on in the press box that I would want to know about? I may be the only one.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for the press box. What Pat's talking about is a lot of times we get the condensation, or we just don't have as great visibility at different parts of the game as we would like. There's no real way to clean that window, so at times we've had a little bit of an obstructed view. But maybe
that might explain some of our coverage last year.
Well, maybe we didn't want to see what was going on.
It wasn't.
That was my point.
It wasn't rose-colored glasses. It was fog glasses.
Hey, they found the $25 million to do the video, the jumbotron, and all the video boards. Maybe they'll find a few $1 million to swap out some windows for the press box too.
Well, that'd be great. I mean, I'd go to the open air. I'd rather have an open air press box. At least I can see. All right. So, guys, let's move on from the Doak Reno to the baseball team. FSU won the Notre Dame series 2-1. I think it surprised everybody on Friday night when Notre Dame took them to the woodshed, but Florida State responded, got a great performance out of Vellini on Saturday morning, a 10 a.m. start, and then started knocking the cover off the ball again in the Sunday 9-inning game. Bob, what do we need to know coming out of Florida's not sweep of Notre Dame, but sweep of the doubleheader?
I think the bummer about this team, and it's really tough to find too many bummers, but when they lose, they don't lose close. They don't lose like a 1-run defeat in a well-contested game. Their losses have been kind of ugly, and then you maybe jump to a conclusion off that loss and worry, well, what happens if they lose a series or whatnot? In the end, Florida State's won 7 weekend series. They've only played 7 weekend series, so they've had the pitching to make it work. They've had the hitting and the defense to make it work. At some point, though, Jamie Arnold doesn't look like Jamie Arnold of last year, and that's a question. Is it a concern? I think we're getting to that point of wondering, how does he get back to that guy that we saw in 2024, that tone-setting ace type of guy? But Joey Vellini has been that guy, whether he's been pitching in game 1 of a series or pitching in game 2. So again, Florida State figuring it out after that Friday, figuring it out after that long delay on Saturday where you don't end up playing an inning of baseball. But I think that the flip side is Alex Lodis in this lineup. They're cranking out a good number of hits and runs. I don't know how many games in a row Lodis has been on base, but it feels like every game he's figuring out how to get on base, whether it's a long ball or a hit or a walk. So this is a lineup that I think has been probably more productive top to bottom than we expected. But yeah, you have to mix in some of those 4-2 games with some of those 10 or 15 run games, and maybe just accept this is Florida State in 2025. But 23-4, pretty good. I mean, really, it's been, I think, a pretty remarkable start overall.
Yeah, Lodice, 11 home runs on the season, and they're just now at the halfway point. And got Jacksonville tomorrow night at home at 6 p.m. And then just the conference schedule gets a little bit more competitive when you bring in number 16 Wake into Mike Martin Field and on Friday night at 8 p.m. And I don't know what time the Saturday and Sunday games are, but certainly it's a primetime game. I'm assuming ACC Network on Friday, Bob, at 8 p.m. You don't see a lot of 8 p.m. starts. So be interesting to see. I'm assuming Jamie Arnold's probably scheduled to throw on Friday. It'd be nice to get him back on schedule. And but listen, I think, 2 games, they've had 34 runs the first game and 9 runs and 17 runs. I mean, I would check Lodice's bat if I was an opposing manager every time he hit the ball. I'd be walking up to the up and saying, hey, check that bat. I mean, I know you can't cork an aluminum bat. I don't know how you cheat with an aluminum bat, but I would definitely be checking, and I'd be checking Miles Bailey's bat too, because that guy was hitting bombs too. But yeah, so not the sweep that some people expected, but listen, as you said, Bob, they are 23-4 and look like it would be a hard out for any team right now to take 2 or 3 from Florida State. And that will become ultimately important as we get closer to the conference championship tournament and regionals and super regionals and continue to move forward. But certainly still ranked number 4 in America by Baseball America. So nothing has changed there, but that was kind of a shocker, I think. I think it was just not so much the fact that they lost on Friday, but how they lost. But again, it's athletics is about how you respond to adversity, as we hear all these coaches talk about, and they certainly did that. I do want to talk about a couple of things. We have not talked much softball, Bob and Jerry, but obviously softball got a sweep this weekend at NC State, and they are 33-5, 9-0 in the ACC, 13-game winning streak. But that's really not what I want to talk about today. Obviously, we all woke up this morning to the announcement by the Florida State website or Twitter account that Coach Lonnie Alameda has been diagnosed with breast cancer and obviously is undergoing treatment, but still obviously coaching every day, Bob. First of all, our thoughts and prayers go out to Lonnie, obviously one of the most beloved coaches in Florida State history, has done a great job with the Florida State softball program. He hates hear this news about anybody, but I think everyone's kind of surprised, right? I mean, you're never really prepared, but seems to be doing well based on what she said with treatment. But just talk a little bit about that and the softball team.
When Florida State people they hire great people. They hire great coaches, but great people. And I think Lonnie's one of the great people on this campus, and what makes it so special. I mean, it hit pretty hard, I think, when you hear somebody say that, they've been diagnosed with breast cancer and are battling it. But in maybe typical Lonnie Alameda way, you watch that 45-second video she put out on Twitter and social media, and it's very much Lonnie optimistic. It's very much appreciative of the softball players, the administration, the nurses at TMH who are helping her. And if there was a doubt, no, she's not going to back off her role as a softball coach, and that's what she's going to do. So I thought it was really a classy message, and I think you kind of feel that warmth from the community, from those who have kind of gotten a chance to meet Lonnie, meet the players, and go to these games, and how much they've fallen in love with Lonnie and the program through the years. So it's going to be, I think similar to what Brooke Wyckoff battled last 18 months or so ago. I think when she announced it too, you're going to see a fan base kind of rally around a really inspirational person and maybe help through those tough days that they're going to be out there.
Yeah. Well, we wish the best for Lonnie as she goes through the treatment, and hopefully we'll give you back to full health very quickly. And I wish her the best, and she'll be in our thoughts and prayers. And I know she'll be supported by the Florida State family, both internally there at the athletic department, obviously softball fans and Florida State fans in general. Let's switch. We've been saying this for a week. We say we're going to talk basketball. We never do. And there is a lot going on. We are more football centric, and they are in the middle of spring football practice, but there's been a lot of portal activity, Bob, with the basketball program under new coach Luke Laux, and they brought a kid in from the portal as opposed to losing a kid, and they signed Kobe McGee from Drexel. What do we need to know about Kobe, and what do we need to know about what is going on with the basketball program? Because I believe he finalized his staff today as well, or got closer to it.
Yeah, I don't think Luke Laux sleeps. I think he's made on caffeine really right now because he's filled out the coaching staff. Yes, we know there's going to be a lot of departures off last year's roster. A few may decide to return, and we'll see how that plays out. But Kobe McGee, 6'6" guard from Drexel, sounds like a big guard U type. I think we all kind of remember that moniker of what Leonard Hamilton recruited, maybe 5 or more years ago. Those bigger guards, longer, good defensive guys. If Luke Laux has a type so far, it's a mid-major player, somebody who's emerging throughout his career, and then is going to make this jump to the Power 4. That's what Kobe McGee is, and I think he's not just the first prospect that Florida State's landed out of the portal. He's going to be the first of a couple in the next few days because they've been bringing in a lot of visitors. One commitment is to come. That could happen later today or Tuesday. We've banked away an interview, and I won't release who that name is, but just realize if you're feeling unsettled about the roster, it's going to move really, really fast here as far as accumulating new players. So look for that interview on the Osceola. And I'll just say the other thing is, between Kurt and I, we've got a thread going with this Florida State basketball transfer portal. Check it out in the Osceola Village, and we'll have kind of news and notes about prospects who are coming in and just kind of updates here and there as far as various guys who make visits, what they thought. They're not going to bat 1,000. We've seen that, all the way through this process. But I think Luke Laux has a type. It's about fit. It's about that personality, a guy who wants to play pro ball, NBA, or overseas. And he's going after shooters. I think this will be a better shooting team next year, 2025, 26, than a lot of these Leonard Hamilton teams have been, these last few years of Leonard's era. So I think those are kind of some broad things that we're watching as we watch this basketball transfer portal.
If I can add one thing to that report, I got a very good report on Luke as far as NIL fundraising, that he's hit the ground running and has brought in a good bit of NIL support already, which is, to me, that's in the top 3. He had to get a staff, he had to get players, and and in order to get the players, he had to get the NIL money. And so he's doing an excellent job on that, I'm told.
Yeah. Well, renewed energy around the basketball program, and it will be interesting to see who they bring in as he gets ready for his first season next winter and spring. Like Bob said, if you are not a subscriber to the Osceola, please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com. We've got a ton of information. As I said, Nick Carlisle and Charles Fishbein were down in Miami for the Miami Elite Camp. We have Nick's nuggets and notes and intel from Rivals Camp Miami. Fish has his Sunday morning quarterback where he offers his thoughts on the camp. You do have to be a subscriber to the Osceola to access those stories. So please go to theosceola.com and subscribe to the Osceola, and you will be able to read that coverage. We also have Bob's story on Earl Little Jr., Jabril Riles. We've got the weekend recap from baseball. We've got all the information on who Luke Laux has hired. Kurt's got an article on that. Also, we've got an article that details Kobe McGee's career at Drexel, and he talks about why he chose Florida State. So you can certainly go there. And, of course, you can also catch up on everything from FSU's first scrimmage this past weekend, including Kurt's column on what he took away from Gus Malzahn and Tony White's press conferences, as well as the video from those press conferences. And additionally, if you're not a subscriber to the Osceola YouTube channel, please hit the subscribe button before you leave and the notification button so that you can get notified when we do a show taped or live. Right now, our schedule is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 3 to 4, or really from 3 to whenever it takes us on the YouTube side of things and the podcast side of things. But we want to thank you for tuning in and joining us. I want to thank Jerry and Bob for taking some time out of their day to join me and come talk a little bit about Florida State athletics and get our impressions of what we heard from Mike Norvell, Gus Malzahn, and Tony White. We will be back with Nick Carlisle on Wednesday to talk a little bit about Rivals Miami camp. We will probably have Bob or Nick on to talk a little bit about the JU game, but please join us at 3 o'clock on the Osceola YouTube channel, and we will see you on Wednesday at 3, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your Monday, and we'll talk to you soon.